Hello, everyone. This is Debbie Ronka, your host, and welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast. I have a question for you. What is the connection between arts, creativity, and wellness? You know, in the culture that we live, where we are seeking and chasing after so many remedies for our own well-being and our health, there's a concept that we may not have considered, and that is how the arts and creativity can literally be the keys to what has been missing in finding wellness and wholeness in life. Well, my guest today, Dr. Tasha Golden, PhD, is a singer-songwriter turned public health scientist, and she's a leading expert in creativity and well-being. She was the first director of research for the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the adjunct faculty for the University of Florida's Center for Arts and Medicine, and lead author of Arts on Prescription, a field guide for U.S. communities. Golden's work is shaped by her early experiences as a career artist and entrepreneur. As a singer-songwriter for the critically acclaimed band Ellery, she toured internationally with songs in TV, film, Showtime, Fox, Netflix, and just so much more. But when severe burnout and depression ended her music career, she began raising questions about mental health, creativity, and well-being that led her to her PhD, her ongoing research and global work as a speaker and a consultant. Holding a PhD in public health, Dr. Golden has published extensively on art's many health impacts. She now speaks and consults around the world, helping clients and audiences apply the science to advanced well-being, connection, innovation, and positive change. Well, welcome, Dr. Tasha Golden, to the Transition Bridge podcast. It's a true honor to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie.
Well, I was so drawn to your story because this podcast is all about transitions, and our life is just the story of transitions. And there's a variety of them. And one of the most difficult to navigate through are those transitions of loss, where things just happen, whether it's suddenly or as a result of a health diagnosis or burnout, as in your case, that becomes the catalyst for change. And then begins the process of navigating through those difficult, painful times. And I was so drawn to your story because what I see, Tasha, is how you created beauty out of ashes. How the burnout from your career, which I'm sure you loved, and then had to step away from that. So for the sake of the audience, can you just take us to that beginning of that where you were in that broken place, and that really did become the catalyst for where you are today?
Sure. I from a really young age had wanted to be a singer-songwriter. I have little notebooks of songs that I was writing when I was, 7, 8, 9 years old. I wanted to travel the world and play my songs for people, and I got to do that for many years, as you said in your very generous introduction. And I loved that work. Like you said, it was my dream job. I thought that I would be doing it till I died. But there were a couple of things happening as I was touring and as I was making records that I certainly didn't know at the time, but they were going to change the trajectory of my career. And the first one, the bigger one, is that a lot of the songs that I wrote, songs were how I processed and navigated difficult experiences in my life. So I had songs about my own experience of depression, for example, or my family's history of domestic violence. And I quickly found that wherever I went in the world, those were always the songs that people wanted to line up after concerts to talk with me about. And they would share their own really personal stories with things like, mental illness or suicide ideation or abuse histories. But the thing that was so standout for me was that many of them said that I was the first person they had ever told. And that was such a big honor for me, obviously. But
Yes.
I also couldn't help thinking about like, oh, if I'm the first person they'd ever told, that means they've never told a doctor or a therapist or not even a spouse or a partner or a close friend. And I knew from my experience that there was that connection with other people who can share that journey with you and help you process and navigate and heal is so important. And even just practically speaking, the things that a physician, for example, doesn't know about your history can affect their ability to take the best care of you, right? So I got really curious about, oh, what is it about a music venue or about a singer or a song that makes these stories speakable for the first time? And
Yes.
how do we bridge the gap between, what makes that possible in the space of the arts and like these other places where that same communication isn't as possible yet, like our workplaces, our clinics, schools, even our homes, right? So I got really curious about that. And then also, the second thing that was going on is that the music industry is just notoriously, it's a grind. It's a really difficult career to be in. I now know that over 70% of people in the music industry report having a mental illness, which is way above the general average. And so it's just a difficult hustle that you're kind of always in, and you're kind of disconnected from your community, right? You're always on the road. And so the combination of that with these stories that I was working really hard to hold space for night after night. As it turns out, I didn't know how to hold space for other people in their stories while also taking care of myself in my story. And I didn't figure that out until too late, right? So the combination of those things, I wound up in catastrophic burnout, major depression, couldn't get out of bed for many weeks, let alone think about playing shows. And in those really dark times, I had to think about who I was and reimagine a future for myself. I felt like I was watching my dream drain out of me in those moments. And I had never had an idea of who I was apart from this particular dream and vision and career, right? And it was an absolutely devastating loss. And the thing that kind of kept pulling me forward in those moments was that question of what was happening for people in the context of these concerts and music. Why were they able to share something of themselves that was deeply important that they hadn't shared otherwise? And how can I explore what's going on there? What is going on there? How can we learn from that to make the world a better place, to make healthcare better? And yeah, I kind of wound up pulling on the thread of that question through a winding journey that ended up with a PhD in public health, specializing in the effects of arts on our mental health, and then, of course, to the work that I do now.
I literally could just feel the pain when you were sharing that because when you have something so much that you love, like just imagining all of that, it was no longer a joy and it was just was leaving you. And then you had this thought of, you remembered how the people were truly impacted by your gift that you've been giving, and then to take that deeper. And
Mm.
who knew, right, that you would ever have a PhD? This was probably something you never ever saw in your life, right?
No, not a chance. No. I remember playing shows on college campuses sometimes, Debbie, and just being like so relieved, like explicitly relieved after the show that we did not, like our concert attendees, we did not have to go, do homework. I was just so glad to like not be in academia, right? I could have never imagined that I would willingly go into that path in such a deep way. So yes, it's amazing where your roads wind up sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things
Mhm.
that you were alluding to is the impact of, your audience and how people would come up to you and share with you for the very first time, not even sharing with their doctor what they had been through. And I was reading some of your work and heard the segments of one of you where you were speaking, and there was a particular song that you wrote, and you were highlighting the chorus that said, "You did everything right. You did everything."
Mm.
And there was something about those words that people were just lining up to come and talk to you afterwards. So tell us about that.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. It's a strange thing sometimes in retrospect to look back on your life and be able to draw lines from things that would have seemed so disparate and so disconnected. But you know, there is this really clear line for me from writing that song that you just mentioned to the work that I'm doing right now. And yeah, I wrote a song called "You Did Everything Right" wrote it for while I was processing the women in my family. I mentioned that I wrote songs about my family's history of domestic violence. This
Yes.
was one of those songs. And I was really pained by the fact that a lot of women in my family lived with this sort of sense or fear that what had happened to them was their own fault somehow. They should have known better. They should have done something differently. And it was pain upon pain, right? And I was, like I said, the way that I process difficult things is to write a song about it. And I wrote this song. The chorus of the song was, "You did everything right." And like you said, well, I didn't think I would play that song for anybody. It was just for me. It was really personal. It was
Okay.
very difficult to sing it. I, couldn't get through it without crying. And so this was just my own song, right? Just for me. But weeks later, I wound up including it in a concert. And yes, afterwards, that was the song specifically that people were lining up wanting to talk about. And they shared such important things with me that I wound up making a commitment that night that, you know what, I'm going to play this song everywhere that I can from now on, because people clearly want to talk about this issue, but also clearly need this message of, when we've been through things like that, that we can move through those. We can recognize what we might want to change about our future, but we don't have to carry this shame and blame that isn't ours to carry, right? And I
Yes.
wanted to make some space to have that conversation. And my commitment, I suppose, to playing that song at so many concerts, or on TV shows, or wherever I could work it into a set, right?
Yeah.
Radio interviews, whatever, it was a big reason why I encountered so many people's stories over time, that song kind of carved out this space for them to feel like they could share what happened, and they were sharing it with somebody who understood it, but also that explicit message of like, this isn't something that's your fault, kind of seemed to create this space for people to share that experience, that whatever it was that they were holding for them. And I think that that's just one example of, humans need multiple ways to carry our stories, to process them, to navigate them, certainly to share them. And we're not always able to do it in this straightforward conversational way, like you and I are talking about, right? Like the way that we are talking right now. And sometimes we need some other options. And music is one way that we have learned as a human race to make options for ourselves, right? We've developed this kind of, you might think of it as a technology for communicating how vast and rich and difficult and complex the human experience can be, right? And one of those ways that we've evolved and figured out to do that is with music, with art of all kinds, and it gives us some space to navigate.
There is something about music and art. I think everyone has a particular song that resonates with them. They can remember where they were, or it goes to a special
Hmm.
event in their life, or there's songs that actually allow you to have that emotional pain of a hurtful time in your life. And when I hear those words, "You did everything right," it's almost like you are giving permission to those that hear that. It's like a key that unlocked their heart and validated
Hmm.
them as a person. It validated them that they were okay and everything that they did was right. It wasn't them. And that's one of the most powerful gifts you can give another person, is give them back their humanity, give them back their value, and do what you can to help brush away that shame. So kudos to
Hmm.
you. Thank you for writing that and making an intention to do it whenever you can, because what maybe was therapy for you in the beginning has now had a profound effect on people around the world.
Mm, thank you. I think that that's a big role that creativity can play in our lives too. The way that sometimes it's not just about the music itself, or even the lyric itself, or whatever it might be. Film, sculpture, paintings, whatever it might be. It's not always just about the thing itself, but the kind of like opportunity to see yourself reflected back to you differently. That there's another story that can be told about this thing that you went through, other than the one that's been playing in your head over and over, right? And sometimes that's what art gives us, is this chance to reimagine who we are, um, who somebody is, reimagine the way that the world, what premise have I accepted about my life, or about the world and how it's working, that I could jiggle loose just a little bit, and start to imagine that I can be different than I thought, or the story might not be so set in stone. There might, like I said, another way see my own life experience, and maybe from a kinder point of view, or just from a different point of view that
Yes.
gives me a different step forward that I wasn't seeing before.
It's so beautiful because sometimes it's only part of our story, but we can have a tendency to take a part of our story and make it our identity, but there's so much more because there's so much more beauty in our life that we need the other stories to come in, um,
Hmm.
and just create the full book. That's, I guess, how I look at life. And, being a life coach myself, just speaking with women, so many times it's their identity is more in what they've experienced, but they have forgotten who they are or who they were. And to be able to
Hmm.
give that back to them so they can go forward in their purpose in life. So that's what you're doing with your music. And I would love to hear, tell us why creativity is really so essential to mental health and well-being. What is it that we're missing?
Oh, there's how much time do we have?
I know
I'm
it's a
just kidding.
big
We
topic.
can talk about this all week. But I think the thing that I'm most drawn to, there's a couple things, a couple ways that I can answer this as far as like how I even got into this work. The first one is, what I was just mentioning as far as we need creativity because we need more ways to imagine who we are and what we can be and what the world is like. James Baldwin said, the world is before you and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And
Yeah.
that is just such a core aspect of what creativity is for. It's not just, do you want to sit down and make art? Sometimes people think that, like, oh, Tasha is an arts advocate. And like, I don't think of myself as an arts advocate. I think of myself more as like a advocate for what it is that humans need to thrive. And as it turns out, art is one of those things in the sense that we need ways to get creative about our own story, our own narrative, and that's both for ourselves personally and then also for the people around us. To what extent have we put people in boxes and said like that's who they are and that's what they'll always be like, and then we are restricted by that. We cannot imagine them being otherwise. We cannot imagine ourselves being otherwise around them because we've kind of like attached this rigidity to it. And sometimes that's necessary. The human brain needs that. We need to have a sense of, if you can't trust that your kitchen table is your kitchen table, that like, if every time you encounter it, you're testing everything, you can't live life that way, right? So there's some things
Right.
that we have to kind of learn to like, oh, this is probably how it is. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's also occasions to test that or to question that and to see if we can get creative. So sometimes I'm trying to steer people away from thinking of creativity as strictly art making or performing or strictly music and paintings and film and things like that. That is so important, but it's more the thing that drives humans to create those things is that we can imagine otherwise. We can imagine that, the poem that you write right now, that a poem that you just wrote didn't exist 5 minutes ago and now it does. Just that is a sign of something that's it's possible for the world to be different than it is right now. We can make take little actions and steps toward doing that both individually and collectively, which is very exciting. And then the other thing that I would say is a reason that we need creativity is that the human experience is just fundamentally vast. It's the only kind of human experience that exists. It's the really vast, impossible to describe kind.
Yes.
And sharing that experience is a very difficult process for most of us. And what I see a lot of times in groups that I work with is that we make life even more difficult by expecting ourselves to be able to just talk openly about it. Like sometimes people will even deride themselves for like, why can't I just get over this and like tell you what I'm feeling, like what's wrong with me? And it's kind of like that idea that we should be able to communicate everything really straightforwardly. That's not a scientific idea. That's not based in any objective fact. That's just a social norm. And we've decided as a society at some point in history that like, especially in quote unquote professional spaces, you have to act a certain way and communicate a certain way, and that's what's expected of you. But there's nothing about that that's core to being human. The way that
Yeah.
we have like all of these various ways that we express ourselves, we do that for a reason. Sometimes in my talks I've said, like we evolved to make and share art for a reason. If this wasn't essential to us, we would have stopped doing it a very long time ago, right? So even if we don't understand why it's essential or exactly what it's doing for us neuroscientifically and otherwise, there's lots of cool studies about that. But even if you don't know, you can know that like this must be essential for us. Being able to communicate our experience with a lot of creative options is somehow essential for us. And it's one of the reasons why people dance when they're happy, or they jump up and down instead of just sitting there and saying, I am happy, right?
Yes, we're
We
not
need lots of
robots.
different ways. Yes,
We're not
exactly.
robots. We need to be expressive. And it is sad to see how expressing emotions, things like that have become lost because either people are afraid to express their emotions or they don't know how, or there's a wound, there's something that's preventing that from coming forth.
Mm.
And to be able to remove that lid, to remove that veil, to be able to allow someone to find that courage to express themselves, that they're not going to be judged, that your emotions really are who you are, and we would love to hear them. Like, I think that's where we all need to get, where I want to hear your soul. I
Mm.
found this quote this morning, and I love it. It says, life beats down and crushes the soul, but art reminds us that you have one.
Mm.
And that's by Stella Adler. And there's like
That's
everything
lovely.
that you're saying, the art reminds us, because I believe it does. It speaks to us and gives us
Yeah.
permission.
And there's some spaces that we find, and it's going to be different for different people across different cultures, but there's spaces that you find that you just intuit, this is a safer place to say what's going on for me than maybe like the boardroom at my workplace or something, right? And a lot of times those spaces where people feel a little bit more freed up to be honest about what they're going through are art spaces. And in some cases it's because the thing that you're experiencing, maybe from the person on stage or, the screen or whatever it is that you're engaging with, they're expressing an emotion that makes them, it's very obvious that they're very human. They're not adhering to this expectation that you're a robot, right? With I call them like 3 robot settings. Like you're allowed to be mildly upset or like fine/neutral or mildly happy. And if you are anything outside of those, people start to look at you funny. But that's, there's nothing scientific about that. Again, that's just norms. And so yeah, people find the places where they can feel safer. And I'll just say that for a lot of people, and especially people from marginalized identities, like there are a lot of places where expressing is not safe. It's a fundamentally unsafe thing for them to do. And it is good, and it can be completely safe and reasonable to be aware of like, where is it that is my safe place? And what I would say, just from a kind of systems point of view or like societal point of view, is how can we make sure that everyone has access to the spaces where they can be themselves and express what they need to express? How can we make sure that that's possible for everybody? And that doesn't mean that every single space will always be safe for everybody, but how can
Exactly.
we ensure that everybody has a community, has a place where they can be, where they can, speak their truth and be who they are, and find a welcome for that.
Yes, because everyone has a place and a space that's
Mhm.
theirs. And so tell us more about why doctors are prescribing, go to museums, dance, your whole focus on, arts on prescription. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, this has been so fun to look into a little bit more over these last several years. In other countries, they have programming that has been called social prescribing. And it's basically this overarching idea that people need things in their community in order to be well. So, you might have a lot going on in your life, and that your general practitioner, your physician might be able to get you some medication that you need, or refer you to a specialist or like physical therapy or something if you need. But there might be other things in your community that you need in order to actually be healthy. That can be as fundamental as you might need some housing assistance. You might need some better access to nutritious food. For some people, in other countries that have social prescribing, it might be like, oh, can you get connected with a volunteer opportunity so you can meet like-minded people, time in nature, things like that. In the US, we have not had social prescribing as it's understood in other countries like the UK, where it's been going since like the 1980s. Um, but we do have something called community referral, and it's based on the same idea that sometimes a doctor might, connect with somebody and realize this person is having these kinds of symptoms, but oh, I just also found out that this person could maybe benefit from a support group in their community. And I have a list of support groups. I'm going to connect them to those support groups. So we already have some things like that, but we certainly in the US have not yet had opportunities widespread where if you go to your physician, your typical physician, they could also prescribe experiences with the arts or with other cultural institutions or with nature. So recently there's been a kind of movement to try to see, like, can we fill that gap in US healthcare practices where we can recognize how can we connect people with more of the assets and resources in their community that can benefit their health. We have this accumulating evidence, especially over the last 20 years, of all of the ways that arts and culture and nature benefit our health, affect our brains and bodies, but we haven't yet connected that evidence to actually changing our healthcare systems, connecting people with those resources in their communities. And at this point, I think especially with mental health crises and loneliness crises, like this epidemic of loneliness that we're facing, I think people are kind of looking at, like, what are all of the tools at our disposal to address these crises? Is there anything that we've left on the table? Are there untapped resources in our communities that could be helping people? And it turns out, yes, arts, culture, nature are often going untapped in communities, especially when it comes to people's healthcare, their mental health, social connection. So in 2020, Mass Cultural Council, that's the State Arts Council for Massachusetts, launched the first statewide arts on prescription program in the US. And I came in a couple years later to evaluate that program. We learned so much from what was working, what wasn't working, their trial and error over a few initial years. And we really wanted to share that with everybody across the country. So how can we write up almost like a guide, a how-to guide for doing this, but make it applicable to everyone across the country? So we wound up developing this field guide for US communities that's grounded in what we learned in Massachusetts, as well as a lot of different pilot programs around the country where people are experimenting with different ways that they can connect healthcare with arts organizations, cultural institutions, nature experiences, whether that's zoos or national parks or things like that in their region to benefit people's health.
So I'm just imagining seeing this guide. So if I'm looking at this guide, is it telling me what to do when I go to a national park? Is it giving me advice? What do I do when I go into museums? Like, walk us through that process.
Great question. The guide is actually a little bit zoomed out from that. It's helping communities, healthcare providers, arts organizations, patient advocacy groups figure out how they can set up this program in their community. Okay. So if you're thinking, oh, where I live, I don't think that any of our healthcare institutions or hospitals have arts on prescription. That is a completely new concept for me. I don't think anybody around here is doing that. If that's the thought that occurs to you, this guide is kind of like, well, here's how you and your community could help build this, help create this, help make sure that this can exist for everybody, including you and other patients around you. So these kinds of programs have been established, like I said, with healthcare facilities and arts organizations. They've also been on college campuses where college, like Stanford is connecting their campus arts activities with their campus mental health care, so that students who are coming in for mental health care can also be directed to some arts experiences on campus. So people are imagining it working in lots of different ways. But a core aspect of it is kind of what you're mentioning, which is that physicians or social workers or mental health counselors, sometimes school counselors, would have to recognize, like, oh, I think that this particular person in front of me might benefit from this kind of activity. So I'm going to kind of initiate the process of getting that person a referral to whatever kind of activity might benefit them. And it's set up in many different ways. In the US, lots of different communities are doing it very differently. So sometimes the physician knows exactly, oh, this is a patient who's dealing with loneliness. I'm going to recommend that they go to this art class that I know maybe they can meet some other people who have similar interests. But a lot of times the physician is making a general recommendation. This person could benefit from some kind of experience in the community. And then that person is either with like a care coordinator or another kind of, like, in some cases, a kind of computer program, are able to get connected with the thing that is most interesting to them or would be most meaningful to them, so that they can find something that they care about and that's most beneficial for their health.
Well, I have to share with you, when I was reading about that arts on prescription, I was going to share with you, my husband and I, we do ballroom dancing. And we started probably about 8 years ago. But I definitely have seen the health benefits And my daughter, who is a nurse practitioner, just mentioned to me yesterday, she said, Mom, do you know people who dance, like it's like 76% chance that you will not get dementia
Oh, interesting.
because of all of the movement and you're using your brain and with all of the feet and what we have found it just brings us great joy, and you're in a community where we're all making mistakes out on the dance floor, but we're learning. And
Mm,
I just wanted to share that too, because like dancing was a part of what you had there. And I've seen the
mm,
benefits. Now my husband's a CEO, so he's in a different part of the brain. I'm the creative one. And so what's interesting to watch is when he goes to dance, it brings him so much joy. He laughs, it releases his stress.
mm,
And there were times where I just wanted to give up and quit. And he was like, no, we need to do this. And he just comes alive when we walk into that
mm.
ballroom. And, so I just wanted to, you'd be surprised the kind of people that come in, they find family. So I'm supporting what it is that you're doing. Like, people come in, they're lonely, and they find a group that they can belong to. So just that encouragement of the arts, that it really can make a
Yeah.
difference. It can give you a community. It could benefit your health.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. It's making me think of so much of the work that I have done with arts and prescription, but also just in general with, what is it, to help people support health and well-being in a larger way. A lot of that work for me has come back to the World Health Organization's definition of health. And they
Oh,
established it in the 1940s. And their definition of health says that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So that's a really high bar: complete mental, physical, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So according
that's
to the WHO, health is complete well-being and not just the absence of, you might say, suffering. So you can think of it as two halves of health. There's the absence of suffering and the presence of well-being. And a lot of times still, all of these years later, when people think about like, am I healthy? A lot of times what they're kind of calculating is like, am I not sick? Am I not in pain? Am I not injured? Do I not have a diagnosis? Right? We're not thinking necessarily of like, what's present. Am I well? Am I thriving? Do I have things in my life that are meaningful to me? And people often immediately will think like, what is well-being, though, since we're not used to talking about that as a society so much
good.
as the absence of disease part, right? And I
Mhm.
get to ask people all over the world, like when I'm giving talks and things like that, what is well-being? And as you can imagine, the definitions are so fascinating. They're really creative, oftentimes very diverse, but they do cohere around some themes. Like it's, well, to be well or to have well-being is to have a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of belonging and connection, oftentimes a sense of being part of something greater than yourself, a sense of having efficacy and agency or influence over things that matter to you, like being able to have a sense of the future, like that you can be part of it and that's something that you can move toward.
Mhm.
Lots of things
Mhm.
like this. And when you start to think about what well-being is for people, a lot of the things that people do in order to find that fall under the umbrella, a really big umbrella of arts and culture. Like if you think about culture in this anthropological sense, what is it that humans have done over time to make meaning together, to connect with each other?
Yes.
So when we have talked with physicians and healthcare providers about arts and prescription, for example, a big question that I get all the time, Debbie, is like, aren't a lot of doctors skeptical of this? Like, do they want to do this? Do they see the value of this? And the answer is they are not skeptical. I'm sure that there are some skeptical physicians out there. I have never talked with any of them. Everybody that I've ever talked to not only sees this as not only are they not opposed to this and not skeptical, but they see it as intuitive and obvious. Because if you think about the typical general practitioner, they encounter a patient who's obviously very lonely or who's new to the community and
Yes.
lacks a way to get connected. What are they supposed to do for that person? Oftentimes, the best thing they can do is give some advice. And we've heard from providers that they feel bad that they can't do more for the patients that they see. And so they see this kind of programming as just adding more tools to their tool belt. Like, I want to have a way to connect people with people in their community. I haven't had that way. This gives me this formal, structured way that I can do something good for people. And one of the interesting findings from our program in Massachusetts is that we found that the doctors themselves said that they felt better once this program was instituted. One of them said, like, I feel like I'm prescribing beauty. Some of them said, so often as doctors, we're telling people to stop doing things they like to do or to start doing things they don't really want to do. And with this kind of program, we're giving them a way to do something that they're really interested in, that they really want to do, oftentimes with their family or with a friend. And that felt so good for them, especially after a time of just unprecedented burnout and difficulty in a global pandemic, right? And so I think exactly what you're talking about with ballroom dancing, like what is it that we would need in our lives to have joy, to have a sense of thriving, to laugh, to connect with other people, to find a sense of family or belonging. That's different for everybody. It's such a subjective experience, right?
Yes.
But we all need and deserve it. And there are things that we can do as a collective to make that more possible for more people.
It's wonderful to have options, to know what the
Right.
options are. And that's what I see about your Arts on Prescription. You're allowing people to see and understand and know what the options are, and you're empowering doctors to, it's not just about the next medicine. It's like, here's something in life that you could do that will help you maybe get through some of those dark times, or when you're feeling down, or inspire their own creativity to come back. Because I think there's a lot of creatives out there that have laid down their creativity through either pain or disappointment, or no longer see the purpose for their creativity. And that's why I was really excited to have you on today, because I believe there's a lot of people in the audience that are creatives, but they don't know how to take it further, or maybe they've stopped dreaming, they've laid it down. But creativity is meant to enjoy, to grow, to empower us. And as you use the word reimagine, just the word imagination, and I think of curiosity. If we don't remain curious, we'll stagnate. We should never lose the wonder and the awe, and never stop asking why. But why? Like I always say, like 2 and 3-year-olds, but why? But why is that bus yellow? But why does the sun come out? And it just stokes creativity. So I think curiosity and creativity go hand in hand.
Yes, and that important aspect of some of my teachers have said, like, life inevitably includes suffering. The human experience includes suffering for all of us. And there's not a route to find, how can I configure everything exactly perfectly in my life so that I can have the life where I never suffer and nobody that I love suffers. And sometimes that can be such a strong message, as if that's the goal in our society, that those of us who experience something that's very devastating or difficult, it's almost like we can feel like, back to that you did everything right thing, we can almost feel like we did something wrong, because what we're quote unquote supposed to be experiencing is this like perfect life. And we somehow got off on some exit ramp that includes suffering, and we're trying to get back to what we think is the main highway of like perfect, no problems. And it's kind of like, no, the main highway is the one that includes suffering. And we are all in this together, and we can certainly find ways with our systems and our structures and collective action and things like that to reduce unnecessary suffering, to reduce preventable, illness and early death. All those kinds of things are things that we can do as a society, and we can put our will toward that. But also, how can we find ways to recognize that suffering does exist, to honor the ways that humans throughout time have made space for that suffering for themselves and for each other, have figured out ways to carry it. And then also through all of that, this is what you just said that made me think of this, have an ability to imagine what we are and what we're heading toward. If what we want to, if what we're moving toward is not some kind of like fantasy perfection where nothing bad ever happens, what is the future that we're heading toward? If it's not your responsibility to figure out how to never hurt again and how to make sure nobody you love ever hurts again, but instead to figure out how to hold that and how you want to show up for that, and what kind of community and society we want to have that can help process and navigate and heal from that, then that reshapes what your goals are and how you imagine the future. But in the middle of suffering, it's still possible, and in some cases I would say essential, to have a sense of creativity in that you can imagine not suffering, and you can imagine a way forward. You can imagine a way to carry to carry who you are and the story that you want to tell, even when it includes things that are really heavy, really dark. But that a lot of that work requires us to show up for each other as well. That's not something that we can always create on our own. Just have enough resolve to just power through. Like, this is something that we do as a fabric of care for each other. We weave together our strengths and show up for each other.
Absolutely. And you said something that I'm passionate about, and because I am a transitions life coach, and I always tell people, don't push through your transition. There's a purpose in it. There's a power in it. And if we just want to push through because it hurts too bad, or we're so afraid of change, you're missing what the transition wants to reveal about you. I believe we discover a deeper part of ourselves in times of transition. Think about you leaving your music career. You discovered a part of you that probably would not have come forth had you stayed in the music industry. Having this PhD and doing this work now. The transitions always have a work and a purpose and a power.
Yeah.
And I really believe we discover another part of us, even in those dark places, because that's when we slow down and we really think more and we kind of reflect, or we should reflect and give space to allow our emotions to reveal and what's going on and what potentially could be next, as you say, like reimagine, because we're not done. Our purpose is divine and it's huge. And, we have to keep on discovering what that is. I would love to hear, I can tell you're passionate about this, your project Uncaged, and how you help women that are incarcerated, with their traumas and things. Oh, that just captured my heart when I read that. So, can you share what it is that you do, and how you help the women?
Yes, Project Uncaged is a trauma-informed creative writing program that I established several years ago to, many years ago, I was invited. I'm grateful for this all the time. I was invited to be a writer in residence at a youth detention facility, specifically working with girls. And it was a week-long kind of almost like an arts camp. Like the girls had choreography that they learned with one person. They did some visual art with somebody else. They did some writing with me. And I left that week just thinking, that is the best way that I spent my time. How can I do that some more? And going into it, I didn't have a personal experience of justice involvement. So I spent a lot of the months leading up to that just researching young people in the juvenile justice system. And it gave me a chance to find out some things about girls specifically, the fastest growing population in the juvenile justice system. But the system itself was created for boys. And so a lot of times in these institutions, there are policies that don't consider girls. There are lots of programs that boys have access to, and sometimes the girls would have no programs at all for them. And just a really inequitable situation for lots of different reasons. And so when I first walked into that opportunity to lead creative writing workshops with them, what I was really aware of was, some of the data that I had read around these inequities in the system, but also a lot of the reasons that girls wind up in the juvenile justice system are traced to trauma histories. That's true for all young people in the system, in particular for girls. There's what people call a sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And so this strong awareness for me of how can I make sure that this writing time is safe, that it's relevant to them, that it's something that is meaningful to them, wherever they are in their lives, that they can in a way that's useful and meaningful to them. And then also, how might this writing time help inform some of those policies and decisions that are being made, by decision makers that they've never met and maybe won't be able to meet. How can we influence the systems and the resources that have led to their involvement in the justice system in the first place? And how can we make sure that those systems and resources are as responsive as possible when they leave, so they can have the best chance of being well and healthy and thrive once they are out of here, right? And so once I left that very first experience, I wanted to establish, a program where we could do that really intentionally. So we published books of girls' poems with their permission, of course, and have
Oh,
sent those. I
wonderful.
always ask the young people, like, where do you want your poems to go? Who is it that you want to hear these? And a lot of times they mention these decision makers in their lives, like the mayor, city council members, judges, wardens. They
Oh,
have something to say, and they want it to be heard. And so we have sent books of girls' poems along with policy briefs to people like state legislators, city council members, and yes, like wardens and judges, so that those people in those positions are able to find out about girls' lives in their words and on their terms, right? But along with that, they're seeing explicit ways that they in their role could do something about that. And as you can imagine, reading girls' poems is a pretty different experience for most of these people than just reading some statistics about them. It's very personal, it's very poignant and very memorable. You know, I worked with a director of a facility a few years ago who said that every time she goes to give a talk about her work, she opens her talk by quoting one of the poems that had been in one of the books that we created
wow.
in her facility, because she knows like that it was resonant for her. It depicted something true about these girls and their experience, and she knew that it would have that effect on her audiences as well, to help kind of like level set, like how can we bring all of us together around something that we do or should care about, which is girls' lived experience and what they're going through in their words. And so it's a combination of recognizing that space that you can make to write in a writing workshop, for example, is space that can reduce stress. We have plenty of science around how creative writing, expressive writing can reduce stress, improve mood, help people connect, improve group dynamics, those kinds of things, that immediate direct benefits. And then the combination of that with a more kind of public health approach, which is how can we use what's being created here, use this art to, one, learn more about young people than we would ever be able to learn from surveys, because again, they share different things in their poems and songs than they're sharing anywhere else. And then also, how can we move the needle on the resources and the systems that are affecting their lives, so that that we as a society can do better by them and let them be the leaders in telling us what they need, and then we can take their lead and do what needs to be done to help boost their well-being.
I love your approach in that whatever you've created has multi-purposes to it. You're reaching not just like the women, but you're reaching the judges and the mayors, and you're trying to go back to where it all happened. How can we make a difference so these girls don't keep winding up in incarceration? So I just love the whole full process of all the work that you're doing. It just helps on multiple levels.
Oh, thank you. That's something I get really passionate about, because there's this idea of health. You know, we talked about definitions of health, but also we tend to think about health as this individual thing. And I often teach it. I have an ebook that's free too, and get you a link. But you know, that you can imagine concentric circles or Russian nesting dolls. But in the innermost one is individual health, and then outside of that is interpersonal health and community health. But all of anything that happens at the individual level is affected by these concentric circles. So we'll start there. Like there, you have your individual health, your behaviors, your genetics, your biology, and then your interpersonal relationships affect your ability to be healthy as well. So does your community, the resources that it has or doesn't have. So does policies. So that's the next concentric circle, the policies that you live under. And outside of that, you know, sociocultural norms. And one reason that I get excited about teaching this, we call it the social ecological model in public health, but I teach it a lot to creatives and leaders of all kinds, is that all of us can be having much more of an influence on health than we realize once we get ourselves outside of just thinking about the individual level. Sometimes people are like, oh, I know that I can help reduce stress, or I know that I can help guide somebody through, you know, like what you do, like through a transition. But oftentimes, our same work, without even changing very much, could also be having an influence at these other layers and levels of health. And it
Yeah.
just takes a little bit of insight, and again, that reimagination, to be like, oh, right, you know, we didn't have to in Project Uncaged do anything that we weren't already doing, other than just to have the thought, oh, these books already exist, they're really beautiful, the girls are really proud of them, they want them sent to the mayor's office, okay, we just send them to the mayor's office. That wasn't like a huge fundamental change in like the labor of the program or even its budget or things like that. It was just having that additional idea that recognized that really moving the needle on health requires us collectively to think of health and all of the different ways that we are affected. And all the different ways that we are affected just become new levers that we can pull to help make life better for ourselves and each other.
Yes, it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a ripple effect how it goes out, and like I love how you shared it just affects everyone, and it just has that ripple effect and it goes out. So how can we do it better, and how can we make a difference and an impact? And I'm just so grateful that you have been here with me today because I've learned so much, and I can see there's so much more to reimagine because there's so much out there. And I would love to just give you the final moment. If there's anything that you would love to share with the audience, anything that you would like to say about creativity or art or anything that's on your heart right now that you would just love to share.
Oh, that's so generous. I think you mentioned earlier, Debbie, that a lot of what you work with when you're leading people through a transition is, not to push through it, that this can teach us something. And as you were talking about that, I was just thinking like this is what we're talking about, is that you, by doing that, just by virtue of doing that, you're giving people a different story to tell about their transition than just that it's painful, than just that it's something to push through. And sometimes we could talk all day about like, in what cases is that true? Like, should we, but like sometimes just having the additional story is what helps us to heal, helps us take a next step. It recognizing that nothing is as it must be. No story that I have is a story that I have to keep about myself. No path that I'm on is a path that I have to stay on. And anytime that we can use our creativity and our ability to reimagine to open up the stories that we can be telling about our situation, both for ourselves and for other people, that's really where art and creativity shines, is giving us more ways to think about our paths forward. So thank you for the way that you're doing that for so many people and listeners, and to anybody listening, to whatever extent you can make space or hold space for somebody to tell or find a different story about their life that opens things up for them. That's creative work. That might be our most crucial creative practice, is to be able to imagine otherwise and do that for ourselves and do that for one another, and make it possible to see a path forward that maybe we weren't seeing before.
Oh, so beautifully shared. And it makes me think of this quote: creativity is the courage to let go of certainties.
Absolutely.
Isn't that
Yes.
powerful? And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're giving. Your gift is what you're giving to all of us, is to reimagine. And to to the audience that's listening, it's don't think that it's over. Something's being birthed inside of you that you need to pause and reimagine what possibly could be next. And that's what Dr. Tasha Golden is all about. And I just want to encourage anyone who would love to reach out to have her come and speak to your organizations. Um, if you just want to go onto her website, she has amazing blogs for you to read. There's so much. Tasha, what would be the best way for people to reach out to you?
Oh, thank you. We can create a custom website for listeners of this show. So I will get a link for that you can, tashagolden.com/transition. That's what we will make it. And you can find there a couple free downloads if those are useful for you, and some ways to get in touch with me. So tashagolden.com/transition.
Wonderful. I will have that in the show notes. And thank you again for all the work that you are doing. Thank you that you did not push through your transition. Thank you that you did pause and you found another part of you, that discovery became a light to all of us. And the gift that you're giving to the world is just precious and priceless. And I can just see how you are helping these girls that are incarcerated. You're helping people come out of their depression. You're helping society do better, think deeper. You're helping the medical arenas to have some more to offer to their patients. It's a beautiful work that you're doing. And thank you. I want to honor you and just bless you for all that you do. And I want to thank my transition tribe for coming in each and every week, where we come together to embrace, grow, and be transformed by the purpose and power of transitions.